Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys for popping in. And James Atwood and I have the pleasure of talking to you guys about some estate planning, new opportunities, and old reminders. And I'm brought to you by COVID-19. The one thing I'll get started with, I worked with James Atwood for several years on estate planning matters. And he reached out to me and said, "Hey, man, I'd like to do some webinar about this." And I said, "I'm in." So James and I work together, of course. We do a little bit of fishing together. He'll always claim he catches bigger fish, but we all know it's a fish tail. But he's an estate planning attorney, partner at Atwood and McCall, and does a lot for families and their individual goals and needs around estate planning. Things that involve forming trusts that will allow assets to benefit multiple generations, helping structure the sale of ownership interest in family-owned businesses, creating effective grantor trusts for families with ultra high net worth estates, and then developing limited partnerships for estate planning and asset protection for real property interests. So the manner of introduction for our first speaker here, James Atwood.
Thank you, Duncan Campbell, and I'd like to also extend thanks to everyone for taking the time to spend your lunch with us to talk about some pretty extraordinary things that are happening in the estate planning world that were driven by some pretty extraordinary things that are happening in all of our worlds. If I could see your all's pictures, I'm guessing most of you, if your guys are probably sporting a COVID beard like Duncan there, or hanging out in your casual clothes. In fact, this is my first day since February that I put on a sports jacket. So I did this for you all today, shed the Under Armour shirt and actually dressed up a little bit. So that being said, there are some truly extraordinary and perhaps once in a lifetime, and God, I hope it's once in a lifetime because I really don't want to have another COVID catastrophe, things these problems have brought. So for the ultra high net worth clients that either have an estate tax problem or are likely to have an estate tax problem so that we can get assets out of the estate at really low tax costs. But before we jump in with both feet, I do want to talk really quick about just basic estate planning. And just a quick reminder, all the reasons that you need to do basic estate planning and your clients are still alive and well. I've listed a few on the screen. I'm not really going to talk about them. I'll highlight three really quick. We work with a lot of blended families in estate planning, and I can tell you this, if you don't have your blended family clients do proper estate planning, it can turn into litigation and really nasty fights. When the first spouse dies, the survivor spouse can get into really big fights over what's community property and what's separate property. Not something that most folks want to get into, so proper planning can help avoid that. Protection from future spouses. Every married couple I've ever worked with, one of their big concerns is, well, if I die and my husband marries the bikini model or wife dies, or vice versa, and wife marries the pool boy, what's going to happen to the dead person's assets later on? Is that future spouse going to get them? We can avoid that. Also, kids, protecting kids. Nobody wants, husband and wife, if they pass away prematurely, they don't want the minor kids, when they turn 18, getting a check for millions of dollars that they can do with whatever they choose. Good decisions don't happen from that. So just a reminder, all the reasons for doing estate planning, apart from even tax issues, are still alive and well. So let's talk about first, let's set the stage here. So what are the factors actually driving the opportunities that Duncan and I are going to talk about? Well, they're pretty straightforward. First of all, historically low interest rates. I know most of you, well, all of you are in the financial world. You've seen the dramatic decrease in the various Fed interest rates that are out there, long-term, short-term, mid-term, darn near zero rates in a lot of cases. And that's enabling us to do a lot of interfamily loans or loans from mom and dad to a trust set up for kids at really low interest rates so that we can charge low interest rates and avoid those loans being treated as gift loans. And we'll talk a lot more about that throughout the presentation. Also, decreases to asset values, particularly closely held companies. In the publicly traded arena, obviously we've all seen the Dow go up and down and up and down, and I think a couple days ago the NASDAQ actually, if I'm not mistaken, hit an all-time high. So publicly traded values are probably going to be up and down. You guys know this better than I do. Closely held company values, probably more so down for the future, at least the short to midterm future, more so than up. There's probably going to be some businesses that are doing just crazy, extraordinarily well that have gone up in value. But for the vast majority of closely held companies, we're going to find that given the risk associated with the economy, there's likely a short-term discount inherent in the value of the company itself because of those problems. And that helps us with estate planning and provides an opportunity with respect to doing some sophisticated planning. So let's take a quick look just generally how interest rates have trended over the last couple of years. If you go back to October of 2018 and backing up just a quick step. So this table shows what's called the applicable federal rate, which is published by the Internal Revenue Service every single month, tied to various indexes. And it sets the minimum bar for an interest rate that must be charged on an inter-family loan, so parents loan to kids, or parents loan to a trust created for kids, or spouses loan to trust created by one spouse to another. It sets the minimum amount of interest that has to be charged on that loan before the loan is considered a gift loan and has different gift tax consequences. So back up to a couple years ago, a midterm rate, which is a rate on the note up to 9 years, was about 2.81%. For a long-term note, which is any note more than 9 years, it was just a tad under 3%. Even those rates were historically pretty good rates. And you can see over the last couple of years, there was even a general downward trend in those rates until we got to February of 2020. It ticked up a little bit. And then you can see we fell off the cliff, and that was due to all the decrease in the rates due to the economic fallout from the COVID disaster. So as of June, as of this month, if you do an interfamily loan, if your client does an interfamily loan, the rate of interest on a note up to 9 years is only 0.43%. So we can do interfamily loans up to 9 years for darn near zero. And if you factor in inflation over the next 9 years, it probably is, effectively speaking, a 0 or even less percent now. Long term, it's a heck of a deal there too. For long-term notes at, say, 20 years, the minimum rate is just a shade over 1%. And these rates are fixed over the entire course of that loan. So they don't have to go up and down with fluctuations in their rate that would occur over the next 20 years. I'm going to show some examples of why this matters and how it works in practical terms in terms of creating structures where we're able to transfer a lot of assets that are really low tax costs. So what are some of the strategies we use with lower interest rates and also lower asset values? Well, one of the big tools in the estate planner's toolbox are what are called estate tax freezes. Estate tax freezes, in a very general sense, and we're going to do some examples, but in a very general sense involve typically family of mom and dad creating trusts for kids and selling a portion of closely held companies, stock in a corporation, a limited partnership interest in a partnership, to these trusts that are out of mom and dad's estate. We typically get a discount on the sale price because it's typically a non-voting, minority, non-marketable type interest, so that when the company goes up in value down the road over the next few years, all that appreciation in value occurs inside the trust and not in mom and dad or husband and wife's estate. So that increase in value avoids the estate tax entirely. Okay? So there's some real opportunities to do freezes now with greatly reduced values. And if you've had clients that have done these in the past, these estate tax freezes, There's a second bite at the apple. We can go back and refinance some of the old notes that were used to sell stock or partnership interest to capture some of the tax upside from the problems with the COVID crisis. Second piece, and Duncan's really going to dig into this one deep. I'm just going to mention it very quickly. We can use low interest rates to lessen the tax impact for what are called irrevocable non-exempt GST trusts. What is that? In a very general sense, when very high net worth persons, husband and wife, pass away and it funnels down to kids, okay? This type of trust is a trust that when the kids later pass away and it goes to grandkids, it's going to trigger a 40% what's called generation skipping tax, okay? Through some planning involving transactions with these trusts, with other trusts, we're able to greatly chip down the effect of that tax. And Duncan will dig into that in pretty great detail here in just a little bit. So let's jump into an example. I like to show this by example because talking about it abstractly isn't always easy to kind of picture the savings. So here's kind of a typical client that we've seen a number of times in our practice, and I'm guessing you see from time to time in your financial advisory practices. We have a husband and wife that wants to do some planning in 2019. So I want to show, first of all, what the planning looks like to do it in 2019, and then what would that planning look like if we did it in 2020 in the lower interest rate and lower asset value climate that we're in today. So kind of a typical lineup of assets that you'll see with clients that are very successful, closely held, closely held companies. So they got a closely held company worth $50 million, a home worth $1.5 million, retirement accounts at $1 million, investment accounts at $10 million, total net worth $62.5 million. And like most clients or many clients in this category, they're looking or thinking about a waterfall event down the road to sell the company. They're always thinking over the next 5, 6, 7 years they're going to get more. So they're thinking they can grow the company to be worth and sell for $60 million 5 years down the road. So what does an estate tax freeze look like on a 2019 plan? So we would set up for husband and wife, and we can do it for kids as well, but I'm going to use husband and wife. Husband sets up a trust for wife. He's going to sell half of his stock to that trust. Wife sets up a very similar trust for husband. She's going to sell her half to that trust. Now, these trusts can't be exactly identical. There's some tax reasons for that. I'm not going to get into that. It's well beyond the scope of our talk today. And these trusts have somewhat of a magical quality, if you will. So when husband sells stock to the trust for wife, that particular sale is going to be treated as a completed transaction for estate and gift tax purposes. So what does that mean? That means that when that stock goes up in value later on, that value is going to be outside of the husband's estate and will not be taxed. For income tax purposes, we get to treat it exactly the opposite. That trust is going to be treated as though husband owns that trust for income tax purposes. So effectively, he's selling the stock to himself, which doesn't trigger any income tax gain on that sale. Okay? The wife is doing the same with identical treatment. So the terms of the sale are basically going to look like, if we did it in 2019, on a 9-year note, we would have had to have charged 2.36% interest, okay, to avoid it being a gift note. And we would also, there's a tax benefit in that when we sell this stock, husband sells the 50% share to the trust for wife and vice versa, we are able to take a discount on the value of that stock. So it's not just half of the underlying value of the company, because we're selling the stock. It's not a controlling interest. And when you have closely held company stock, it's hard to go out and sell that stock in the marketplace and get a marketability discount. So we're probably going to get a discount in the ballpark of 30% on that stock, which means that discounted amount magically disappears from the estate tax equation and is not taxed. So if you want to look at kind of the deal structure, it looks kind of like this. Wife sells her 50 shares. to the trust set up for husband. She gets back a $17.5 million 9-year note with interest of 2.36%. Husband does exactly the same. Okay? So what are the estate tax savings associated with this sale? Well, we were able to get a 30% discount on both sales, so we made 30% of the value of the $50 million company disappear, which is $15 million, at an estate tax rate of 40%, so we got $6 million in savings from the discount. If the company does go up $10 million in value from the $50 million to $60 million, that $10 million is going to be inside the trust and not taxed for husband and wife, so we save 40% on that. However, we have to take into account, and this is where low interest rates really come into play here, that those interest payments have to be made by those trusts back to husband and wife every single year. So when those interest payments are made back to husband and wife, it goes from trust to husband and wife, and is therefore, again, in their estate and subject to estate tax. And over the course of a 5-year period, there's a little over $4 million in interest payments that are made from those trusts back to husband and wife, which increases their estate. And now the 40% tax rate pulls into play an extra $1.6 million in estate tax. So when we net these out, this plan under these facts saved the clients about $8.4 million in estate tax. Is that a good plan? Yes, it's a good plan. That's exactly what we would have recommended to do in 2019. However, if clients didn't do it in 2019, there's a chance to get even better results post-COVID. So what does that look like? Okay, so everything stays the same under this scenario, except that now the closely held company has a depressed enterprise value. I'm not talking about the discounts for lack of control and marketability on the sale of the stock. We're talking about the enterprise itself. And due to the risk that's in the marketplace, due to those things that we have, I think more people join us. Yes, yes, we do have one person. We'll call him out as being party. Okay. So, due to the fact that we have that risk, the company, I've gone one slide too far, the company has gone from a $50 million enterprise value, if there's a 40% discount, to a $30 million enterprise value. So we didn't make, COVID made $20 million of value magically disappear, okay? And the thought and the hope is it's a temporary situation. When the economy bounces back and companies ramp back up over some period of time, we're going to regain that lost $20 million in value. So if we do the same transaction in 2020 that we did in 2019, basically the same structure, except that we're going to have slightly different terms, right? And slightly different terms mean that on the 9-year note that we had to charge 2 1/3% interest, now we only have to charge 0.43% interest on those same notes. We still, when we sell the stock of the company, now the company is only worth $30 million. That's our starting point. We still get to discount that a further 30%, okay, for lack of control, lack of marketability, those sorts of discounts when we sell the stock. So the deal transaction probably looks something like this. Again, wife sells all her 50 shares to trust for husband. Instead of getting back a $17.5 million note, now it's only $10.5 million after we factor in both the COVID enterprise value discount and also the discounts on the sale of the stock. So husband gets exactly the same note back. So what does these tax savings look like for 2020? So the COVID discount, right, the $20 million that just poof disappeared. At 40%, that's an $8 million tax savings because we got it out of the estate today and didn't wait for the bounce back to occur in the value of the company. We still got, even on the $30 million, we got a 30% discount, which is another $9 million that we were able to make disappear from the estate. So that yielded a $3.6 million estate tax savings. When we get the bounce back and we get that extra $10 million in appreciation in value, we're going to also save that as well. So now we're at a $4 million savings in that piece as well. Now notice we still have some leakage out of those trusts for interest payments back to husband and wife, okay? But we greatly reduced the leakage because the interest rates are dramatically lower than they were back in 2019. So over a 5-year period, we're looking at $450,000 in interest payments versus in the previous example, well over $4 million, which goes back in their states and creates a $180,000 tax liability, which compared to about a $1.7 million tax liability in the same transaction that would have occurred in 2019. So let's compare 2019, 2020. Okay? In 2020, if we did the same transaction, we saved $15.4 million as opposed to 2019, where the savings was $8.4 million. Easy math, right? It's an extra savings of $7 million. So the point being, with the confluence of all these factors, the lower interest rates, and the dramatic decrease in enterprise values in a lot of closely held companies, it creates, I don't want to say the perfect storm. It is a storm, but it's an opportunity for the ultra-high net worth clients. Now, when we get a recovery in the economy, and I don't know if it's going to be a rocket ship or a V-shape or a U-shape or a U-turn, nobody really knows this, right? There's a lot of opinion. But over some period of time, those values are going to come back, right? And once they come back, we've lost that opportunity. Low interest rates, they might be with us for some amount of time. I don't know exactly how long. You guys probably have a better finger on the pulse on this than I do. But we know what we have today. And with interest rates, I don't think they can get much lower. And if asset values get much lower, well, a lot of the companies probably won't be around to do things with you. So I would encourage you to encourage your clients to think about this, look at it, educate them on this, and help them along the process of thinking about taking some action. So let's talk briefly what happened if you have clients that already did this. You say, well, James, we missed out on the opportunity. They already did it in 2018 or 19 or 17. What do we do now? Well, you have missed out on part of the opportunity, right? I mean, it is what it is. We can't go back and change the value. But there is an opportunity on these estate tax freezes to go back and refinance some of the notes on old estate tax freezes. So, quick little example. We did a deal back in October of 2018 on a $10 million note, 12-year note. It would require about $300,000 per year in interest payments that are going back out of the trust, back to the grantor's estate, and therefore taxable later on. If we decided to take that note in June of 2020 and refinance it into a 9-year note, okay, at 0.43% interest, we're taking the interest down each year, the leakage out of the trust, down to only $43,000 per year. A savings of just over $250,000 per year. If you extrapolate that over the entire 9 years of that note, we are reducing the payments out of that trust by about $2.3 million. So that's $2.3 million less that's back in the grantor's estate and won't be subject to the estate tax. So the 40% rate, it's just over $900,000 in savings on that piece. So what I like to do, because I'm kind of at the end of my piece, but I've got about 7 or 8 minutes if there are any questions, then you can ask a question by hitting the raise your hand feature. I'm guessing most of you know how to do that. I'm probably the least tech savvy person among us here today. If you raise your hand, I will unmute you and you can ask your question. So I'll give it a moment. I'm not seeing any hands. Although some of you are, I'll tell you what, I'm going to unmute everybody just for a moment, because some of you are dialing in and you don't have the ability to raise your hand. So let me see if I can unmute everybody. Maybe I have to do it.
Yeah, you guys do it, James. Figure it out.
Everybody who is joined in via the computer can raise their hand. We only have a couple of people on the phone. So going once, going twice. Okay. I don't see any questions. Okay, so quick call to action. So if any of you have any questions you want to discuss offline, I know Duncan and I would be more than happy to dig into the details. At whatever level is helpful for you. And perhaps help you with a couple of extra tools that you have in your tool belt when you're talking to clients to educate them on the opportunities. And if you have a client that wants to jump on a 30-minute phone call to talk about it, and they'll both Duncan and I am more than pleased to do that. So let's shift gears. I'm going to let Duncan take this home. I've known Duncan for many years now. He's lying about my fishing abilities. For those of you who caught the beginning, I always catch bigger fish. Duncan is a consummate professional. He's a CPA. He heads up the ultra high net worth practice group at Baker Tilly. And he and his team provide a really deep bench to help really high net worth clients deal with a number of issues, including estate tax planning issues. And I've worked with Duncan on a number of large, complicated estates. He's always a very valuable team member to work with on these deals. He's extremely knowledgeable. He's very good with clients. I can absolutely trust Duncan to work with anybody I ever send him. I know he'll do a good job and be very professional. So with that being said, Duncan, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you, James. Remind me to Venmo you the money later for telling everybody I said.
Cash, please.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you guys for, it looks like we had a couple right there, but hopefully we can get the presentation out to you guys so you have some things to look at there. So what James talked about was the estate planning on the front end, and I'll refer to that as generation. And it's always around trying to freeze the kind of estate as is, because most times the client did not think about doing that when they formed the company or creation of their wealth as they grew up 20 years old to 60 years old. They wake up one day with $60 million of assets. So what I want to talk today is about what happens, what opportunity we have now for generation 2. So Gen 1 has done the estate plan. It's then moved down into the next level of trust for the kids, or generation 2, and typically it's in 2 buckets. It's in a exempt, GST exempt bucket and a non-GST exempt bucket. As James mentioned earlier, if you want to go to the next slide, he talked about the non-GST exempt trust, which of course those are at death of generation 2. It will be subject to a generation skipping tax of 40%. So in years past, when we've had these AFR rates being close to 3%, it may not have made sense to even do what we're going to talk about here, what I call freezing the non-exempt trust assets, because the plan previous years has always been, well, if you got exempt trust assets and non-exempt trust assets, draw down the non-exempt trust assets, spend them, leave the exempt trust assets alone, let it grow. Well, with a huge disparity in potential for rate of return over a period of time and the interest rate that you have per minimum to do on a loan, it creates a humongous transfer of wealth. So I wanted to, since I'm a numbers guy and a CPA, I wanted to kind of walk through an example of one I ran across earlier this year, and we worked through in trying to freeze that non-exempt trust asset and freezing those values so that we can stifle or stunt the GST tax when it does happen when the child passes. So just to lay the groundwork here, the parents pass, the estate passes to both a GST, non-GST exempt trust. Of course, the children are the primary beneficiaries. On the passing of a child, the GST non-exempt gets GST. So when the estate poured out, about $23 million went into the exempt trust, $45 million into the non-exempt. So right off the bat, the next day, if the children pass away, there is a 40% tax on that $45 million, which is the so that's kind of the base point we're starting with. We'll go to the next slide. So, like I talked about, we have interest rates now that are historically low. And the one thing I'll add, in James's slide, it had the June AFR rate of 1.01% for the 9-year plus loans. Actually, they published the July AFR rate yesterday. It's at 1.17, so it's picked up 16 basis points within a month. So we may be having a trend of upward, so we've got a cycle of top here. So what it involves, and ultimately, in following James' plan there was a sale, there was a loan between the seller and the acquirer, and you paid interest. Nothing much difference here except there's not a sale. It's just that the exempt trust would go over to the non-exempt trust and borrow the money. So in my example here, we would have the non-exempt trust lend, instead of it being $45 million, some number under $44 million, over to the exempt trust because we need some money left in the non-exempt trust for operating accounts. Of course, the children, they're going to have support needs for their health, education, maintenance, and support, which we refer to those as HIMs, and they're going to be wanting to draw down from the non-exempt trust because that's the perfect vehicle for them to draw the money from because we're trying to avoid this GST tax. So we need some dry powder there to accomplish that goal, but we don't need it all there, and we can do a freezing of that value in that money. So we go to the next slide here. I wanted to walk through basically if we do a loan, what does it look like? If we don't do a loan, what does it look like? What is the GST tax and then the savings? So on the surface, if the children are going to live another 30 years and their HIMs is $1.5 million a year, and let's just assume an after-tax rate of return on that money sitting in that trust of 4%. After 30 years, after $1.5 million is pulled out each year, that trust has grown from 45 million to 61 million by just doing that. You would think that's phenomenal value for the next generation. But if we make a loan from the non-exempt over to the exempt, the children still live another 30 years. They are still drawing $1.5 million from the trust every year to support themselves. And if I calculate an after-tax rate of return, because there's going to be interest, in my example, 1.01%, the after-tax rate of return is actually 0.606. So if I calculate that rate of return on interest, the trust value goes from 45 million to 5 million over the 30 years. It's collecting interest from the exempt trust, which is adding to the value to support. But I'm also having it get paid principal and receive principal from the exempt trust. So just in that difference there alone, when we were staring at a $24 million GST tax, and making this loan and collecting interest, still siphoning money off for him, I can move the value down to $5 million and be left with a $2 million GST tax. So staring at $22.7 million of savings. And all I'm doing is borrowing from one bucket to another to grow the other bucket, okay? Because we don't want to be growing the exempt trust bucket. We want to be spending that down. But if we've got the assets, we may not want to give people access to more money than they should, because they are the kids, right? The parents are always worried about spoiling their kids. So to get all that to the exempt bucket, we've got a potential there to grow that exponentially. So if we go in this loan option, if we look to the next slide, I'll talk about what the exempt trust looks like. So the exempt trust has borrowed the money from the non-exempt trust. It's sitting on it. It has it to invest. It owes a loan payment back to the non-exempt trust each year, okay? And it's going to include interest. So in the previous example, I said if we do nothing, children live another 30 years. They're not going to withdraw from this trust because it's the exempt trust. If I still do a moderate after-tax rate of return of 4%, there's no GST tax that tells them. That trust alone, the $23 million, becomes close to $75 million, which for anybody, that's a great answer. But now if the trust has a bigger asset base and borrows the $45 million, it's going to be sitting on $68 million to invest. The children, of course, still living another 30 years, and this trust is going to owe $1.7 million back over to the non-exempt trust entities. So they're paying the principal and interest. We need that principal there to support the HIMSS standard for the non-exempt trust. They need that. It needs that cash then to pay beneficiary. Still a 4% return, no GST tax. That $68 million, if it's never being taken down for any HIM other than its $1.7 million loan payment, grows to $320 million. Okay, look at that. If they do nothing, $75 million. If they make this loan, we're staring at $320 million. So just with that piece of loan, the value creation between the two is another $245 million for the generation 3, and it's not subject to GST tax at that. So we go to the next slide here to get an even hammer the point home even further. If I compare kind of the generation 3 value that's available there, they do nothing in this whole scenario. We've got the exempt trust that's grown to $74 million. We got the non-exempt trust that's grown to $61 million. There would be $25 million due in tax at the end of the day, and they're left with a value of $111 million. But if we make this loan and let it grow, still satisfying him, we end up with $323 million in value between the two trusts, pay $2 million in GST tax, which is I would consider a moderate amount of tax, and we've transferred $321 million to generation 3, giving a bump up in value ultimately to the next gen, $210 million. Now, I tried to use 4% as a low number because who knows what the market's going to do. Some may use 7, etc. But even with a 1% loan amount that you have now, anything you earn over 1% in any scenario here is obviously going to make this value transfer grow, right? It's going to end up in that next loan column somewhere between 111 million and infinity, depending on the rate of return. But at the same time, we can freeze that non-exempt trust value. It'll be spent down as it's gone, and then lower that GST tax ability at the time of those children's deaths. So that's the back end part, estate planning at the front end, you've got to do it. But then sometimes there's plans already in place. People are asking, well, what is it can I do now? And with such a low rate, and you've got this spread here on a rate of return that you might be able to get, invest it wisely. May not be this year, but you could do a long-term loan for 20 or 30 years at that 1% rate. At some point over time, that rate of return could eclipse 4% over the lifetime of that loan. So there is a major potential for asset transfer of value here, just by fact of these rates as low as they are. So I believe that was my last slide there. The one thing too I wanted to note, if you guys do have questions, I know sometimes you ask for feedback and you get crickets, but if you want, there's a platform in Zoom here. You can pop some questions in there too. If you just want to hit a general one for anyone there, but we've got a little bit extra time here. I'd like to open that up for questions for anyone. If you want to do it in chat, if we want to try to unmute.
Duncan, I'll unmute the folks on the phone. The folks who are on video, if you just want to raise your hand, then I'll unmute you.
Hey James, it's Claudia. I have a quick question for you guys. I'll start us off. So I know that, for example, hopefully I'm getting this right, like you can do like a lifetime gifting, and I can't remember what like the maximum is, but would you guys recommend doing a loan instead of maxing that out, or doing a combination of both, or what does that kind of look like?
Well, it depends on the overall facts. I'm working with a client right now where we're doing it all via gift and none via a sale. In fact, Duncan and I are both working on that one right now together. For ultra high net worth persons where we're trying to get as much out of the estate as possible, I generally recommend primarily using the sale tactic because we're able to leverage a lot more out of the estate than just burning all of the exemption. And there's a little bit more of these asset freezes. I didn't cover the fact that we have to seed these trusts for capital, typically around 15% of whatever that anticipated loan amount is. So there's an inherent gift involved in those. It's just too complicated to handle when we're trying to talk about other things here. So there is some combination of gifting involved, even in an estate tax freeze. But whether we also want to trend more heavily to doing, straight up gifts is going to depend on the facts and circumstances. And Duncan, you may want to add something to that.
Yeah, I mean, any amount you can do under the annual exclusion, which is $15,000 per donor. So husband and wife really have $30,000 for each of their kids. But any amount you can do there, it's not in a loan scenario, and we don't have to worry about interest on that account. Now, 1% interest may not be much to have to worry about tracking, but over time, you may have to be rewriting documents every year. Every time you do the gift, you got a new interest rate in every state. So, I would say, doing the regular $15,000 probably happens anyway. For me, in tax compliance, we ask the question to our clients all the time: do you make any gifts of $15,000 or less to your kids? And they're like, sure I did. But did you have any documented cash gifts? That we need to make sure we're exceeding that to worry about the state gift tax return. So I think ultimately, if they want to do that, I don't see any reason to stop. It's just a good way to help support their children while they're living, or grandkids while they're living, and give them that. What I normally see is that feeling of having money, because one of the things in all of this, of course, you may say, well, Gen 3 is getting $210 million more than they should have gotten, or they thought they were going to get. Are we setting them up to be spoiled here, and then they're going to have too much in assets, right? So sometimes it takes a little bit of the family to prepare the kids to be ready to have that money too, and that could be a good tool to, when they're a teenager, give them $15,000. It's enough to make them feel spoiled, but not enough to win life either. So it helps on the psychology of that.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hey, Duncan, it's Jim Rowell.
Yes, sir.
I got a quick question about this last example. I must have just missed something. Is that equity growth under the make loan scenario because there's no compounding tax in that scenario? I mean, because
So I did after-tax rate of returns there. The exempt trust will have to pay tax. I made the assumption that 4% is just it's invested in the stock market, collecting interest, dividends, cap gains. If there was a company in there that may be a little bit different scenario, and the rate of return may be higher than 4%, but after you do taxes on it, the after rate of return may be 3.5%. So that this is more you're just a scenario to kind of show potential, but there's really pen to paper type thing. But I could just say absolutely, with a 1% loan right now, you're going to end up with a better answer making that loan between the trust for that exempt trust to use it to grow it however it wants to. Because even if you're making, you would need 2.5% to break even on an after-tax rate of return. I did that wrong. You would need to be making 1.68%. Sorry, 1.68% on a after-tax rate of return to outpace the 1% interest rate on the loan. So it's a very small hurdle to get over.
but in the do nothing scenario, I mean, we had call it $100 million of beginning assets. I mean, those are going to grow in both scenarios. I get the notion of avoiding the tax because you've moved it to the exempt trust, but your equity values that are being taxed in both scenarios are vastly different, right? You've got one that's 100 and something million versus one that's 325 million before you even start calculating tax.
Yeah, so on the non-exempt do nothing, you got to remember it starts at 45 and it's going to have $1.5 million it's got to pay out each year. And my cowboy math in coming up with this was that it is earning a return, but that return is knocked down every year because of the payout. But if I have it in the exempt, I've got more time. I've got more money invested with more time with where $1.7 million interest payments not causing me my return to drop. So I'd have to send you the Excel files I pulled out together on this because when I did this first, I was like scratching my head a little bit. So I could show you the numbers behind that.
Okay, I'm just kind of scratching my head on the growth assumptions. Just on the cuff, I think that both portfolios would grow. I mean, because you're just shifting dollars on that.
Yeah, the non-exempt, we wouldn't be trying to grow it per se, because that's the thing you want to avoid, because it's going to be subject to tax, and we would want it in a different bucket than growing aggressively. And so generally that is not invested as well as it is.
Okay. So I guess if you change that assumption and grew that, the tax bite would even be bigger. So I mean, you'd probably still have order of magnitude similarities in terms of the do nothing scenario hurting you dramatically compared to the make loan scenario.
Correct. That GST tax goes up to 40 million or 50 million.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Going once. Going twice. And sold. Well, thank you all very much for taking the time to join us over your lunch. We hope we've provided you with a little bit of value that you can take back to your clients. If you have any further questions or want to talk about it in depth, feel free to reach out to Duncan or myself. And with that, I hope you guys have a nice rest of the week and a nice afternoon. Thank you for joining us.